So today I'm going to answer some questions about my exhaust system and why I put a Y pipe in it. So for most people, especially with Miatas, you can get pretty cheap exhaust systems for around 300 to 500 or even up to 1,000. But for me, I didn't really see the worth in paying that much for it because more often than not, it didn't do much. Ideally, what people get exhaust systems for are either to get more pull, a little bit of more back pressure so that they can pull that exhaust. But if you're not doing anything with the headers and you're just going from the cat back, then it doesn't really do much at that bottleneck of the headers. So in my case, I figured I don't know if I'm gonna make it NA for its entirety. I might try to either do a turbo or I might do a supercharger, but that means I would have to change basically everything from the back end, from the headers and back. So I figured, why don't I just do something that adds a little bit more fun to the car, as well as it's cheaper than buying a whole exhaust system. So I ended up buying the little Y pipe, where it's an electronic flap that opens. And what I did is I watched Donut Media's video where they cut the exhaust on, I think it was a Mustang, to kind of get more growl out of it. So the muffler, the main purpose is to muffle, that's what it is. So what I did is I cut the pipe right before the muffler. Now, when I watched the video on Donut Media, all they used were some grinding wheel exhaust cutters and then used exhaust clamps. For my situation, I really messed up because first, if you're gonna use exhaust clamps, it has to be straight. You cannot have any bends on it. Now with this section, it goes straight and then up and then into the muffler. So the problem was I cut that angle and it wasn't straight, so the exhaust clamps weren't holding well. So long story short, I put a lot of work in trying to cut it. The exhaust clamp cutter didn't work. The wheels, I'll have to show you that in a second, but it didn't work. I just had a lot of issues. So I think my tips would be to measure where you're gonna cut it and weld it. I found somebody in my area that was willing to help me out for a decent price to just weld that for me. I didn't care if it looked special or perfect. I just wanted it to be functional and as well as hold in place. So I got that welded on, and then I just pulled the electronic switch into my interior through the O2 sensor wire. So I just went up through there and then I put it in the center console and I just put on a switch. So I can bypass that muffler to make it a little bit louder without having to pay the whole price for the exhaust system, as well as I have the option of it being quiet as well as loud. So a lot of people like to rev their engines at me, and so I can do it back at them. But if you're in that kind of situation where maybe you don't want to buy a whole exhaust system, there's a lot of different, even OEM cars that have these electronic flaps to help muffle the exhaust or to kind of give some more, I guess, loudness or make it a little bit louder or sound a little bit cooler. My M2 actually does that on both exhaust tips. It has flaps that open and close to either make it quiet or louder when it's in sport mode. So I just basically put that concept into this car for about $150. So yeah, you can do that if you want to, and that will save you some money, as well as you don't have to get a whole exhaust system and you just are using a Sawzall or whatever you can to cut that pipe. But let me show you the pieces that I had for it. So I'll throw up some footage. I took some personal footage of when I did it, but it was a lot bigger of a task than I thought. So it ended up taking me a couple days to do, and I got pretty frustrated when I was actually doing it. So I'll show some video clips of that, but here's the tailpipe cutter that I thought would work and the one that I saw on Donut Media, and it seemed easy to them, or at least for what I saw, but this didn't do anything. If anything, it just made a groove in the tailpipe, but it didn't do any sort of cutting at all. It might just be because this tailpipe is, or this exhaust is just really thick wall on that, or I'm not too sure, but long story short, I just had to use a Sawzall and just kind of cut through that on the 2 parts. So you probably will have to do the same thing. My best suggestion would be to find somebody that can either cut it, but if you can cut it, do it, then take it to somebody that can either weld it together. But you can also move it further up on a straight section of the exhaust system, but I felt like there wasn't enough clearance for that whole motor system to sit. So, and I also wanted that exhaust to come out the back end instead of getting stuck underneath the car if I were at idle. So that was kind of the situation that I was in. But yeah, I'll show the clips here and then you can kind of see what I went through. But hopefully this helps you understand what I did and why I did it, and why maybe you might want to do it.